It's a great opportunity. Today we are going to learn the different types of management, how management works, and the current scene of management in the world. Professor Simon, could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Hi, hi everybody. It's Simon Haslam here. I'm a professor, visiting professor at Durham Business School in the northeast of England, and that probably takes part of my working life. At the university, I look after strategy, strategic management, and management consulting as academic subjects. The other parts of my life are as a management consultant, working internationally with a range of clients. And my specialism is strategic leadership. So I tend to work at board of director level and help individual leaders think about the development of their own capability and organizations thinking about their own focus and organizational development. It's an area of work that I absolutely adore. I know for most of us, this year has been very constrained on actual travel. But one of the thrills about my line of work is I do get to work in different organizations in different cultures and different countries a lot, and I learn a great deal from that. So I'm here before you as an academic on one front and a practicing management consultant on another. I have a role for the global consulting body, which is the International Council for Management Consulting Institutes, and I'm what's referred to as the chair of the academic fellows. So within the field of management consulting, there are various academics who write about the subject, and I am, I feel like the custodian of that particular community. And we've got a global project at the moment to produce the world's first consulting book that has a genuine global perspective with 200 countries in the world, making sure that each country has representation in terms of their approach to management consulting. So thank you, that's me.
We are more than honored speaking to you, Professor, today. So my first question is, what are the main styles of management currently?
I'm going to start just by doing a little bit of the history. And a lot of you all know this, but I'm just going to put the timeline in place. My interpretation is that management became popular around the scientific management movement, and that was over 100 years ago, and especially the work of Frederick Taylor. And that was when we sort of took thinking away from artisan people doing incredibly skilled work to how that work became organized. And that became the basis for, if you like, the efficiency movement and mass production. And so the Taylorism approach to the scientific management, it was the first, in my opinion, deliberate view of management as something that could be studied and influenced. And that was about this idea of you've got to have a focus, so you have a purpose and you've got resources. And once you know your resources and once you know your purpose, it's all about how you organize those resources as efficiently as you can. And that took us down into the realms of disciplines like work study. It underpins areas like lean and business process reengineering before that. And I think the sting in the tail is that management might look at resources in the broadest sense. Most of the resources are relatively easy to manage with the exception of one. So you can manage real estate, you can probably manage a brand, you can manage money, you can manage materials. But the most challenging resource is about people. And when we started to understand the importance as well as the challenge around people as a resource, scientific management got some softer edges, and out of management became the, I guess, the study of leadership and followership, where we understood about motivation. We started to learn about organizational cultures, and we would recognize that not that people are malleable, but if you create the right conditions, you can get substantially more out of people than if you don't. So I think it was a softening in terms of the efficiency into the idea of thinking about people as a special type of resource. So I think where that's taken us is some challenges. And just to come back to the question about where we are now, a lot of the established views of management were around scale and efficiency. So you do it very slickly, and you do it with big volumes, that enables you to have relatively low price points, which benefits consumers, obviously, and it also benefits producers. But we felt this over the past 10 years or so, the idea of our environment being volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So one of the big shifts is how you run an organization in a world that is not that predictable. And I think this year just plays to this in abundance. So there are very few organizations who, coming into 2020, had predicted and considered the pandemic in their own risk approach. I only know of one substantial organization that did this. And it just plays to the point that you can do the efficiency organization thing to some degree, but skillful management and leadership is how do you create, and the word that's capturing a lot of people is this term agile. That to be valuable in a changing world, you need to be incredibly fleet of foot. And I suppose, what does the fleet of foot mean? I mean, I think those of us who are into soccer will have just acknowledged the passing of Diego Maradona today. And before we came onto this particular meeting, I was just looking at some of the footage on YouTube about him as a player on the pitch. And fleet of foot was epitomized by Madonna's speed, the ability to change direction, and the ability to do things effectively and leave others in his wake. So fleet of foot doesn't mean being blown by the breeze. It means having the capability in management to do it with far more vibrancy than your competitors. So what we tend to do with agility in management is to get people closer to the action so that they are feeling the change of the world in the moment. And you allow people lower down the organization to make bigger decisions. And you also do something which is slightly counterintuitive, is you avoid full commitment. So the conventional view of management is you own the space and you've got the resources and you run it through as efficiently as you can. If you choose not to own the resources, that enables you to get into technologies and into areas quicker, but also not be, I guess, constrained by them. Now, I'm speaking to you from my home in Scotland. I live in Glasgow in Scotland. And I'll give you one example. Up until, I think it was last year, I might be wrong on the time on this, the rail franchise was held by an organization called Virgin. And what I mean by the rail franchise, if I wanted to go and work in London, which in the UK, as you can appreciate, an awful lot of work happens in London. The best way for me to get down there was to get on the train from Glasgow, and then 4.5 hours later, I would be in London. Now, the train franchise on that, what is the west coast of the UK main rail line, was held by the Virgin organization. And the train said Virgin on the side. The staff wore outfits which were badged Virgin. And the customer experience, as close as could be facilitated on a rail train, was the typical Virgin, we love our customers approach. So very warm, very flexible. But Virgin didn't provide the train service itself. It partnered with an organization called Stagecoach. And here's why. Because if you're trying to manage in very fluid environments, what you have to be able to do is to get into areas quick without needing to learn everything yourself. And also when the opportunity is finished, to be able to get out. So if a rail franchise lasts for 10 years, for example, why would you invest in the rolling stock of rail carriages and trains? Why would you have a whole bunch of human resources when you know perhaps at the end of 10 years, your franchise agreement will not be renewed? So this is slightly counterintuitive, that with contemporary management, a lot of organizations are liking this idea of agile, where you trust people to make good decisions. And if they make the wrong decision, it's not their fault. It is your fault as a leader for perhaps not equipping them with the opportunity. And it's also recognizing that, of course, not every decision is going to go well. Therefore, if you're going to run agile, to have a culture that is very entrepreneurial, so very enterprising, not blaming people if they get it wrong. And this is very uncomfortable for a lot of organizations. But I think what people are finding is the world will continue to be incredibly vibrant and fluid, hard to predict. And if we are trying to run successful organizations in these types of regimes, we need to figure the recipe. So I think what we've seen is management come from this very scientific base. We've seen the fragmentation of human resources as a special type of resource within management. And we've seen the how do we respond to an incredibly challenged external environment, which is not by using, if you like, old school approaches. So that's, I think, where we are in terms of management at the moment.
That is awesome. And how do you evaluate this scene? Where are the weaknesses and where are the strengths?
Yeah, the strengths and the weaknesses. I think one of the things that's been really, really useful is we have begun to understand more and more about people. So the traditional way of understanding people was approaches through psychology and sociology, so the study of the individual and study of the group. One of the growths we've seen over the past decade is the growth of neuroscience. And so that's the ability of biology and chemistry and electronics to work together. And okay, it might be in its infancy, but we are learning about human behavior from another dimension. And I think one of the things that's been helpful is we now know a lot about motivation. Triggers that help somebody perform to a high level compared to somebody else. But the conflict is, we also know you can't motivate anybody else. So if I were to summarize motivation to say that a contemporary view of motivation, so the total motivation model, would say that the three things which fire people up are the degree to which they really enjoy their work, the degree to which they believe that their organization has a purpose which they view as wholesome. And people are also fired up if they see their role as leading on to other things, so the time of potential. And there are other factors which aren't necessarily as fiery uppish, but for some people are necessities. So the idea of a degree of economic activity. So I need to earn money to pay the bills, to put bread on the table. Some people do it for emotional reasons. So one can be emotionally pressured into doing things. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's what the research is showing. And sometimes people's habits are just because they haven't challenged them. So I end up doing things because I have an inertia. So we know all this, but the issue here is motivation comes from within for the most part. So you can, as a manager, as a leader, create the conditions for people to become motivated. So you give them a fantastic working environment, so they love coming to work, great colleagues to work with. You have the abilities to see them develop their careers, so they see the potential in the organization. And if an organization is what I would refer to as wholesome, they have a very strong spiritual compass, then people are more likely to commit to it. But that has to come from within. So for me, there's a tension around motivation. So there's a plus, we know about it, we know more about it. And the minus is all we can do as managers is create the environment rather than anything else. Can I do one more?
Yeah, sure.
In terms of tensions,
Yeah.
Managerial and organizational culture. And I think with our understanding of leadership, one of the qualities that we've really embraced is the role of a manager, a leader, to what I call set the tone in the organization. A phrase that was popularized by Barack Obama was to walk the talk, which means if I am leading, don't just listen to what I say, watch what I do. And a whole lot of leadership comes from example. And we now know that one of the key roles of a leader is to set the tone, to try and generate the culture in their organization, which they believe is appropriate. So what she does as the leader or manager, what he does is walking the talk. Now, if that's really useful, one of the prices we can pay if we're not careful is lack of diversity. Because if you create a culture that attracts a certain type of individual, one of the prices you can pay is you get as a reward something called groupthink. So you bring a load of people together who are, okay, maybe physically different, but mentally of a similar persuasion. Now, that can make it quite convivial and harmonious to manage, but you can probably accept that the price you've paid is the lack of that person who's an outlier to challenge management thinking. So I think it's a lovely question you ask, because for every upside in management, there is a vulnerability. So cultural, and the phrase we use is values congruency, so people in line with the values, absolutely fantastic. But careful you don't sort of reward the organization with the narrowness of perspective. So just those two, I think, in terms of motivation, has to come from within. Culture, the price, be careful not to have a bunch of clones.
Yeah, would you like to add other points about this area?
Those for me are the two ones. I think the one that, if I were to bring in a third, I will. It's to do with society. Generations shift, but with the democratization of technology, with the advent of smartphones, we've ended up equipping vast chunks of the world with a computer in their pocket. And that's, in the evolution and potential, what a great thing. Because you could argue that all of us, at the press of a couple of buttons, have access to as much information as we choose to. But it doesn't mean to say that everybody's going to use it and everybody's going to home in on information that is actually robust. So I think it's complicated management to a degree. There's no winding the clock back, and I absolutely would support that knowledge and information should be democratized. But what it's meant is that when we look at people, they are far more exacting and demanding than they have been before, for a whole host of reasons. I think that's really good, because they help hold organizations to account. But sometimes the challenge that managers face is the information on which they are being held to account is not pure, it's not comprehensive. So it's just added to the landscape, I think. And I think, let me just reiterate, the democratization of information and knowledge, what a great thing that is how then organizations deal with that, I think, is a complexity that management is wrestling with. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Where do you see the future of the management in the light of COVID-19?
I think, yeah, there's a slide somewhere on this computer, and I shan't muck about, do screen shares or anything like that. But it was a multiple choice question. It was a question asked to leaders, and it's not my original work, and I have borrowed it. And the question was this: what has been the architect of your digitization strategy? Was it A, your chief executive? Was it B, your chief information officer? Or was it C, COVID-19? And so the point is that a lot of organizations have fundamentally changed their business model, not because they were doing it proactively, it's because they had to do it as a matter of survival. But that's had two consequences. One is it's given us a real sharp shock about having organizations that are genuinely fit for purpose in uncertainty. And two, it has made a situation that is irreversible. There is no belief that we are going to go back to 2019. I think every leader and every manager I speak to recognizes the way forward would be a melding of what we've experienced in 2020 and some of 2019. Now, I'm somebody who loves travel and working with different clients in different parts of the world. And I'm accepting I shall never be doing the degree of travel I was doing 2 years ago. There will be some, but the medium that we're using, Zoom, has proven incredibly useful, both in terms of spontaneity, impact on the planet. And so there are those things. So we are beginning to work with new business models, which will be heavily digital. We will have organization designs which are far more flexible. And some organizations are starting to think about with the almost with the most widespreadness of knowledge and the increasing capability of people to run models which are labeled as holistic, which is you run an organization which is leaderless, and you let people in local areas make really big decisions. So for example, if I think I wish to hire a new person into the organization, I don't need approval, I just go do it. And you can imagine how empowering that could be for people to have that freedom of agency to go and do things that you think are important. But you can imagine the organizational culture and the mindset of management to allow that to happen. Created through the digital through the digital journey. I think we understand that. We will see more fluid business models that are far less top down, and we will learn how to make them work because there are not too many organizations who have done this. And I think the other thing to come into this is when we do these times most financially effective, and this is such a good thing because what we are recognizing is the language that's prominent in management is the idea of what's called the triple bottom line, or the 3 Ps. Rather than drive your business, your end, this idea of doing things that are right for people, so for communities, for societies, and things that are right for the planet. Now, you may have covered this on previous conversations, but one of my children, she studied psychology at her one takeaway from this lesson: there's only one species that is capable of destroying itself, which is the human race. So you get other species which fight, but you don't get a pride of lions taking on other lions and obliterating the global lion population. Ducks don't do it. So ducks might squabble over territory, but the ducks aren't going to square up to each other and annihilate themselves. And we have got, as you know, to the situation where we are probably capable in now, if we don't change our behavior, of destroying the world as human habitat. And I think we're on a knife edge. So I think with the movement to holacracy, which is to say, okay, we can run organizations which generate great value, but are not the most financially efficient. It helps liberate the thinking is, why should an organization prioritize financial returns when what's important is the custodian of the human race? What's important is the health of the entire planet. And if we don't look after those two things, we are probably putting a gun to our heads as a civilization, or a noose around our neck. So I'm really enjoying how management is shifting from generation of financial wealth alone to, of course, we need to create value for consumers, for society, and also for the people in the organization and the investors. But we need to do so in a way that is cognizant of the precarious position that we as a civilization have taken the world to. So I think they're the shifts going forward.
And what are your main recommendations or your vision for a better management in the future? Where do you suggest management can grow, can improve?
I would love to see management around the world embracing triple bottom line. So when we run organizations, and it doesn't matter if I'm running government, and it doesn't matter when I'm running a large corporation, and it doesn't matter when I'm running a small organization, that I do things with my organization that are valuable to my consumer or to my funder, but are also cognizant of the impact on the planet and my impact on other people, number one. I think the other thing I wish for is management to become more humble. And we've learned a lot about leadership and how to be effective leaders. And I think the shift here is that a sense of humility working with other people goes an awful long way. And if we do that, we're more likely to we are more likely to create valuable conditions if we focus on the breadth of how we create value. So it's not financial only, it's society, and it's the idea of the environment, the planet as well. And we're more likely to have more appealing organizations with that sense of humility that is probably more capable of relating to people more on the level rather than the command control. Now, I'm giving a generality here. So will what I'm saying apply to every organization, every point in time? Of course it won't. But I think those would be two tones that I would love to see going forward.
Perfect. What else would you like to add about the topic management today, Professor?
I'm of an age where I'm very far from being a digital native. And it is this lovely transition time. And I would hope that people like me are quick to embrace the capabilities and effectiveness of digital. I could hold an organization back if I dominated the organization by my old school views. Now, maybe in 20 years' time, it's not an issue because probably everybody in power in an organization will be a digital native. But I think we're in this very interesting transition at the moment where there is an old guard like me who, if I choose not to embrace digital quickly, I will hold my organization back. So I think that's an interesting transition, and it's probably once in, I don't know, when was the last time we had a transition like this? Maybe 250 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, when we went to go from agricultural economies to industrial economies. So I think how we manage, and it's up to my generation because we're the ones who are sitting around the boardroom table and we're the ones who are not on the pace to help accelerate that shift.
There's been more than amazing.
I would add that as well.
Yeah, it has been more than amazing, more than awesome talking to you, Professor, today. I really appreciate your great ideas about management. Thank you so much for that indeed, Doctor.
With great pleasure. And thank you for inviting me.